Warning: the following podcast contains themes of graphic nature. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, and thank you for joining me on the very first Well Unknown podcast. My name is Mike Rodriguez, and I'll be your host today. The Well Unknown podcast is a place where I'll discuss non-political conspiracy theories, cryptids, unexplained phenomena, UFOs, and more. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the legend of the Mothman. We'll go over the various first-hand sightings, news reports, and police reports, and then move on to similar cryptids seen in nearby areas and around the world. So I wanted to preface this episode with a quick note. Basically, this is my first ever produced podcast, so I'm still learning the ropes and learning kind of how to create a flow, how to turn, a bunch of different articles and information into something that flows and is still informative but entertaining at the same time. And I know that this first podcast won't be perfect, but I'm super excited about the direction that we're going, and I hope you guys will enjoy it and join me on the journey. And if you have any suggestions or comments, please feel free to reach out and let me know. I look forward to all of your suggestions, comments, what you liked, didn't like about the podcast. I'd love to hear it. And of course, if you have ideas for new episodes as well, I'm always up for hearing ideas for what kinds of episodes. I have tons of ideas already with cryptids and urban legends that I've looked up, and I even found a list of one for every state, and I think it'd be really cool to go through every single state's legendary cryptid and discuss the origins and everything it's about. So I do have a lot of content ready for you guys, but if you have something you'd really like to see, if it's something new, I would add it to the list. If it's something that I already have, it'll let me know what to do first, because obviously one podcast each, it would take a long time to even get to those 50 states. So all of the information you can send my way is going to help mold where the podcast goes and what direction it goes. I did set up a Patreon, and if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so there. The podcast itself is absolutely free on all the normal platforms, but if you do join Patreon, you do get the ad-free version, and you get I don't want to say a video version, but it is a video of the podcast that includes documents, articles that I reference, photos that I found, artist renditions of the cryptids or stories we're talking about. So it's kind of interesting to watch as you're listening to the podcast if you enjoy that kind of stuff. And ad-free is always a plus as well. You can get that for, of course, just $5 a month. And if you do want to support us at a higher tier, we do offer a $15 a month tier that gets you a shout out in every episode while you're a patron. So that's kind of a fun one too. If you want to support at a higher level, that'll get you a little shout out at the video. But if you just want the ad-free version, it is just $5 a month, and you'll get access to all of our episodes. But yeah, well, I guess that would be one episode, but all of the future episodes from then on. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, and I look forward to making even more of these. I hope you enjoy the podcast. In West Virginia folklore, the Mothman is a humanoid creature reportedly seen in the Point Pleasant area from November 15th of 1966 to December 15th of 1967. The first newspaper report was published in the Point Pleasant Registrar dated November 16th, 1966. It was titled "Couples See Man-Sized Bird, Creature, Something." The national press soon picked up on reports and helped spread the story across the U.S. I managed to find the original newspaper report, and I can read that to you now. Point Pleasant Registrar in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, Wednesday, November 16th, 1966. It was a bird or something. It definitely wasn't a flying saucer. Two Point Pleasant couples said today they encountered a man-sized bird-like creature in the TNT area about midnight last night. Sheriff's deputies and city police went to the scene about 2 o'clock this morning, but were unable to spot anything. But the two young men telling their story this morning were dead serious and asserted they hadn't been drinking. Steve Millette of 3305 Jackson Avenue and Roger Scarberry of 809 30th Street described the thing as being about 6 or 7 feet tall, having a wingspan of 10 feet, and red eyes about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. It was like a man with wings, Millett said. It wasn't anything you'd see on TV or in a monster movie. The men and their wives were in Scarberry's car between 11:30 p.m. and midnight when they spotted the creature near the old power plant adjacent to the old National Guard Armory buildings. The creature was standing on 3 occasions and was described as being extremely fast. It flew about 100 miles per hour in flight, but was clumsy when running. Deputy Millard Halstead said he had only seen dust in the vicinity of a coalfield, but it could have been caused by the bird, he said. I'm a hard guy to scare, Scarberry said, but last night I was for sure getting out of there. They did just that, but the thing followed them. They said it was hovering the car, apparently gliding, until they reached the National Guard Armory on Route 62. We went downtown, turned around, and went back, and there it was again, Millett said. It seemed to be waiting on us. He said the light gray-like creature then scurried through a field. It also had flown across the top of the car. It apparently is afraid of light, Millett reasoned, and maybe it thought it was scaring us off. The young men said they saw the creature's eyes, which glowed red, only when their light shined on it, and it seemed to want to get away from the lights. They said it looked like a man with wings, but that the head was not an outstanding characteristic. Both were slightly pale and tired from lack of sleep during the night following their harrowing experience. They speculated that the first thing was living in a vacant power plant, possibly in one of the huge boilers. There are pigeons in all the other buildings, Millett said, but not in that one. If I had seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything, Scarberry commented, but there were 4 of us who saw it. They said it didn't resemble a bat in any way, but maybe what you'd visualize as an angel of sorts. The last time they saw it was at the gate of the C.C. Lewis farm on Route 62. They heard a sound like wings flapping, and they said a bird rose straight up like a helicopter. This doesn't have an explanation to it, Millett said. It was an animal, but nothing like I've seen before. Are they going back to look for the creature? Yes, Millett said. This afternoon and again tonight. Today, Scarberry said, but tonight, I don't know. But there's more to the news article than meets the eye. An article by Matthew Wendler in the Cardinal Points Online explains the situation a bit further. According to this report, after the initial sighting, the couples were in a state of shock and fear. They were scared, they weren't sure exactly what they had seen, and they were debating on whether they should even report the incident to police, because they were like, no one's going to believe us, no one's going to take us seriously. We don't even really know what we saw, so how can we convince the police that there's even anything out here? They're just going to say we're crazy. So they didn't think they were going to be believed, and they decided to head back to the location to investigate. They went back up north on Route 62, and then after they drove out there for a while, they got kind of spooked and changed their mind and were like, no, we're going to go home, forget it. They turned the car around, and they noticed as they were driving back, there was a carcass of an animal lying next to the road. As they drove by it, something flew down and hit the back of their car as they passed by, and it hit them really hard, almost like stay away from that. And it flopped and sputtered against their trunk before falling to the pavement. When it hit the ground, it quickly darted away and took off into an adjacent field, so it was running at that point. They drove into town at that point because obviously something had actually hit their car. They knew that something was out there and decided to ask the owners to call the police. Deputy Millard Halstead arrived shortly afterwards, and he had known all 4 individuals beforehand. He had met both of the Scarberrys and the Millettes, and he didn't perceive them as any kind of troublemakers. As the news article explained, they weren't drinking, they weren't incoherent, they hadn't done anything that would cloud their judgment, and he actually knew them personally, and they had no reason to make these things up. But their claims left him baffled. He didn't know what to say. All he knew was that the fear in their eyes was real, so they saw something. Police investigated the munition site, and they didn't find anything, but did report in the police report that strange static noises kept emitting from their radios when they were in the area. So they did experience some abnormalities in the area which is kind of important for what we're going to learn later about the Mothman sightings and how they correlate with other events. But yeah, they went in to interview the Millettes and the Scarberrys separately. They were asked to describe the incident, all the events that happened, the order of events, specific details that they had, specifically asked each person to make sure they weren't lying. And they asked them all to provide a sketch of what they'd seen. And all of the statements and all the drawings corroborated the other stories. Now, the interesting thing is Linda Scarberry later claimed to have also been visited by men in black suits. And she's not the only person who was visited in men in black suits. According to the article, they asked her about the encounter with the creature and warned her not to discuss what she witnessed with anyone. And that's kind of the same story that we get from other people who have also been in the situation. They get a visit from people in black suits. It's never overly threatening or demanding, just very firm. We don't want you to talk about this. It's never like, we're going to hurt you if you do, or we're going to do this if you do. But there's always an interview. They ask a lot of questions, and then they ask you not to speak about it. So that's an interesting thing to note. Is we'll get back to the black suits in this episode as well as in other episodes where they've shown up, because the Mothman isn't the only thing that has brought up the black suits. We've obviously heard of Men in Black and things like that with UFOs, but it seems that there is some organization that does use black suits, either in the military or otherwise, to basically speak to people about paranormal events. The original news report wasn't the only sighting in Point Pleasant. 3 days before the couple's encounter, 5 men were digging graves for a burial at a cemetery in the nearby town of Glenlyn. One of the men, Kenneth Duncan, claimed to have witnessed a large man-like figure with wings emerge from the trees and fly down low over their heads. A local contractor named Newell Partridge claimed to have seen the creature in a meadow close to his home. He shined a light at it, later mentioning its eyes glowed like red bike reflectors. Partridge's German Shepherd ran after the creature and never returned. A woman named Marcella Bennett and her infant daughter had been visiting a friend who had lived close to the munitions dump. As she was approaching her vehicle to leave, she saw a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes standing beside her car. She dropped her baby out of fright, quickly picking her up and running back into the house. Throughout the night, the creature peeked through the house's windows. By the time police arrived, it was gone. Bennett claims to have seen the creature at her own house several nights following the encounter. This clip from the History Channel's Monster Quest Season 4, Episode 5, entitled Mothman, goes over a first-hand encounter.
The first thing I saw were the eyes and what I thought maybe were teeth.
A local Cherokee man was being driven home by his son when they encountered the Mothman. They sped up and started making sharp turns to shake the animal. But the beast pursued them undeterred.
The first thing we saw was this winged creature, 14-foot wingspan at least. It was huge. It was almost covered half the road.
When the car slowed down, the monster attacked the vehicle.
And it was close enough for me almost to reach out and touch. It almost hit the windshield.
The terrifying encounter gave the man a clear look at the monster.
It had a wide mouth. The eyes were the size of the reflectors that are alongside the road. The body was attached to the wings. It had gray and brown hair-like, but not much hair. More fleshy, kind of like a bat. That's why I called it a man bat, because it looked like a cross between a man and a bat.
The attack ended when the creature abruptly changed directions before their eyes.
It was like in mid-air at windshield height. I have never seen an animal move like that. It just went straight up.
But as it departed, the creature let out a shriek.
We heard the sound in our heads. It was kind of like vertigo. It made us sick to our stomach, real high-pitched ringing. And my son swerved and went off the road. He was driving, and he opened the driver's door and threw up, and I got sick.
The man returned to the location a couple of days later. What he found was even more disturbing.
We went out to look at the site and thinking maybe it had come out of the bushes there someplace, or it was on the road or whatever, and found a deer carcass that looked like it was filleted, laying alongside the ditch.
The appearance of the creature matched historic descriptions of the Mothman.
Another local resident named Connie Carpenter claimed to have been driving home from church when she saw something fly straight towards her vehicle, nearly causing her to crash. She said its eyes were red like the devil. Like Linda Scarberry, Carpenter also claimed to have had an encounter with the men in black suits. Mason County Sheriff George Johnson commented that he believed the sightings were due to an unusually large heron he termed the shitepoke. Wildlife biologist Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University also told reporters that descriptions and sightings fit the sandhill crane, a large American crane almost as tall as a man with 7-foot wingspan, featuring circles of reddish coloring around the eyes. The bird may have wandered out of its migration route and therefore was unrecognized at first because it was not native to this region, he said. But how would the reddish coloring around its eyes explain the reflective nature in all the reports? Over the next few months, even more reports started trickling in. At least 100 reports from people of all ages circulated throughout Point Pleasant, describing a monster that was able to ascend straight up into the air like a helicopter. All of the witnesses described the same birdman with glowing, hypnotic red eyes and wings of a bat. Mary Heyer, a reporter at the time of the Mothman sightings, received over 500 calls, not only about this mysterious creature, but also strange lights in the sky, electrical interference, mysterious humming sounds, and UFO sightings. Then, on December 15th of 1967, a year after the Mothman sightings began, tragedy struck. During rush hour traffic, the Silver Bridge collapsed. 46 people died, and the Mothman disappeared. Strangely enough, the Mothman was spotted at another bridge collapse in 2007. The I-35W bridge in Minneapolis, Minnesota was opened for traffic in 1967, the exact same year the Silver Bridge collapsed. Reports of the Mothman began trickling in on June 27th of 2007, preceding the collapse by a mere month. Many claimed to see a humanoid creature flapping its massive wings in the surrounding area and at the bridge itself. An Illinois woman witnessed the creepy cryptid while driving just outside of Stewartville, Minnesota on June 27th, called paranormal radio show host George Noory on Coast to Coast AM, and described the creature as having a huge wing about the width of a Ford. Then, on August 1st of 2007, after a month of Mothman sightings, the I-35W bridge collapsed during rush hour, taking the lives of 13 people with it and injuring 145 more. Now, this is where Mothman gets really interesting for me, because I feel like this is where it differs from other types of cryptids and sightings. Like, if you see a Bigfoot, it's because it's from a certain area and you expect it to be there. With Mothman, it seems to always be preceded by disasters. So, anytime there's been Mothman sightings in a certain area, it's almost like a warning for some sort of disaster to come, and not just bridges either. There's been quite a few other disasters that have had similar sightings that I'll go over shortly, all over the world. And they all describe the same type of creature, and they all describe the same type of movements, and they all precede some sort of disaster or near disaster. So there's a few different ones that we'll go over, the first of which is in Freiburg, Germany. On September 10th of 1978, a group of miners came face to face with a seemingly headless creature with glowing red eyes on its chest, blocking the mine's entrance. At first, they thought it was a man in a trench coat, but they quickly realized it was not a coat, but unfurled large black wings. The men remained in the mine entrance, stunned and staring at the creature, until it let out a blood-curdling screech that sent the miners scrambling about. About an hour later, the men felt a seismic rumble and witnessed a plume of dust shoot from the mine as it collapsed. If the men had gone to their stations in the mine as usual, the majority of them would have died. It appeared as though what they had dubbed the Freiburg Schreier saved their lives. Unfortunately, many weren't so lucky. Throughout 1985, many scientists and other workers at the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, Ukraine, claimed to see a huge black bird-like creature with the body of a man flying around the plant. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Those who saw the red-eyed beast also reported a series of strange, harassing phone calls and a string of nightmares leading up to the disastrous explosion in April of 1986. Now, in other cases, we also saw strange phenomena beforehand, when the radios of police tended to play static and go off intermittently when they were near the area of disaster. And this seems to be a similar type of experience where the closer people were to the imminent disaster, the more they tended to see and report seeing the Mothman. On April 26 of 1986, the day of the accident, several people saw the huge black bird actually flying around the smoke after the explosion. Even those in the nearby town of Pripyat claimed to have seen the strange creature that became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl in the days leading up to the disaster. Pripyat was also affected and later evacuated because of the harmful radiation. Could radiation be another cause for these mysterious sightings? Another popular account of the Mothman being seen before a disaster is with Marcus Poles. Marcus Poles was an American who was visiting Japan at the time. He was out with a friend near the Fukushima plant when suddenly they heard a loud whooshing sound and a terrible screeching. As they looked back towards the plant, they saw a figure. I'll read this in Poles' own words. It was large and black. From the distance I was at, it looked to be sitting on top of one of the squared-shaped buildings. It sat there for about 5 seconds, then it unfurled a large set of what I could only describe as large black wings. The creature took flight, circling the plant a few times before coming closer to them. That's when I noticed the 2 large red eyes. They seemed to glow from within and with a blood-red hue. They were unblinking in the 3 to 4 seconds we saw them. We knew they were looking straight at us. We knew this creature knew we could see it, and it made no attempt to disguise itself. Poles describes an immense feeling of dread that washed over him, and the creature vanished as quickly as it had appeared. It wasn't until Poles was back home in America, hearing the news on CNN about the devastation of the Japanese earthquake and the explosions at the very same nuclear power plant where he had witnessed the creature, that he realized he may have seen the emphasis harbinger of disaster known as the Mothman. Some believe the large, hairy, red-eyed creature the people of La Junta, Mexico began to see stalking the area in 2009 was the legendary Mothman. These sightings occurred around the time leading up to the 2009 swine flu outbreak in Mexico. 2 witnesses, according to Ranker, Angela Mendez and Viviana Ledesma, experienced pure terror as they heard the creature's screeches emanating out of an apple orchard near Miñaca Cemetery. A student who requested to remain anonymous reported the Mothman chasing him for 15 minutes on the night of March 6, 2009. Despite the best efforts of local authorities to hunt down the entity, no traces were found. During the days leading up to the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, several people reported sightings of the black-winged creature flying near the Twin Towers. In the days that followed, those reporting the creature were allegedly approached by men in black and warned to stop talking about what they saw. Initially, I almost didn't even report on the specific sightings just because of the sensitivity and how recent the disaster was. But there's actually some evidence, including photo and video evidence, that supposedly showed this creature online. So I wanted to at least mention it as well in the podcast. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The Mothman wasn't first sighted in Point Pleasant as we initially discussed. It turns out there have been sightings long before Point Pleasant ever got wind of the Mothman, no pun intended. In fact, as far back as 1926, we find similar reports about a creature known as the Man Dragon. Now, I found this information on unknownexplorers.com/mandragon.php. I'll put the links on our Patreon in the resources where you can find credits to all of the articles we cite here. In the Xiante Dam in the southeastern foothills of China, almost overnight, sightings of a large winged black figure, the man-dragon, began to spread around the small farming community located beneath the Xiante Dam. The creature reportedly was seen hovering above the dam and frightening several people who witnessed it. Very similarly to the bridge experience in Point Pleasant, reports came in from various different farming communities located around the dam, all reporting the exact same thing. On the afternoon of January 19th of 1926, during the height of the man-dragon sightings, the Xiante Dam suffered a massive structural failure and collapsed, sending over 40 billion gallons of water crashing into the farming villages below. Several villages were entirely destroyed beneath the massive force of the rushing water, and when the water finally drained, the death toll was estimated to be over 15,000. Although most records and reports of the disaster were destroyed by the ruling Communist Party, many of the survivors of this horrible disaster did confirm that the man-dragon not only showed itself above the ill-fated dam, but also to many of the victims. The events surrounding the collapse of the Xiante Dam have led many researchers to suggest that the creature, called man-dragon in this case, is actually the same dark-winged apparition seen flying over the location of several other disasters. This creature, also known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl, the Freidberg Shrieker, and of course, the infamous Mothman of West Virginia, is thought by many to be an ominous sign of disaster to come. As the creature seems to vanish after each disaster occurs, it is nearly impossible to study, and to this day all accounts of the mysterious figure remain unsolved. So what about recent sightings? Thanks to the internet, reporting these sightings is easier than ever. Websites dedicated to compiling evidence and finding reports of these sightings are growing in numbers, and there's more and more information to pull from. I found a few recent sightings at both the UFO Clearinghouse and Cryptids Fandom, and I'd like to go over those now. Apparently, a truck driver who stopped at the O'Hare National Airport in Chicago on November 26 of 2019 claimed he spotted a person with wings around 7 feet tall standing by a fence while he took a smoke break. According to the truck driver, he said the creature had a wingspan of approximately 6 feet and, quote, looked like a demon or goblin and was solid black. The witness mentioned the creature may have had its back to him and that it was walking with a gait like a bird. He claimed it was flapping its wings as it walked towards the large field that's by the airport and disappeared into the night. While the witness himself didn't mention the Mothman, he claimed that he was in the presence of a demon and felt as such. Surprisingly, it wasn't this truck driver's first run-in with a cryptid. When the investigator asked if he'd seen anything like it before, the truck driver detailed a similar experience as a child in Mexico where a solid black-winged creature was circling an open field and made a loud screeching noise before flying off into the surrounding forest, similar to the experience of those who have claimed to have encountered the Mothman there. Also in Chicago, this time supported by video evidence, is another report to the Chicago Reader. Quote, I was spending the afternoon on a rooftop, and I saw something in the sky. It was fairly high up and fairly far away. It wasn't being buffeted about by the wind, it was moving slowly but not randomly. He continues, at first I thought it was a bird, but none I'd seen before because it was just so huge in the way it was flapping its wings. The longer I watched it, it was like, what the hell is that thing? It was freaky. A similar report comes from Woodstock, Illinois. Lon Strickler reported to the Singular Fortean the following quote. He said that it thought it might have been Bigfoot initially, but then noticed that it had a large set of membrane wings attached to the back, extending over the top of its head. He described the shape of the wings as that of a gargoyle. The body was 8 to 9 feet in height and covered in dark fur, and the arms and legs were well defined. Another report comes from Aaron Drain, as reported to the Phantoms and Monsters website. Quote, "We were watching and observing as the moon began its transit when we heard a very loud scream. It sounded like squeaky truck brakes that squeal when you're pressing hard on them. At first we thought that's what it was, maybe a CTA bus or a big truck with brakes that needed changing or maintenance. Then we heard it again. This time it lasted about 3 seconds, where the previous sound was brief. I looked up to see a large object flying low over the docks that sticks out in Burnham Harbor from across the water. This object looked like a large black bat, but also had humanoid features such as pronounced arms and legs." So what is the Mothman? Lots of speculation exists from all over the internet, including other cryptid fandoms, as well as scientists, police reports, and just in general people trying to either figure out or discredit the reports of obviously a giant beast flying around before disasters. Mothman sightings have been associated with at least 2 other cryptids, including gigantic thunderbirds with gray bodies and red heads that were sighted in the same area, as well as the Owlman, which is another identical or similar creature with wings and red eyes that was sighted in Cornwall, England in 1976. Skeptic Joe Nickell posited that owls were an explanation because of their eye shine and their silhouette resembling a headless Mothman. Most modern skeptics seem to agree with Joe Nickell, but the sightings might just be too extraordinary to attribute them to such animals. 2 legends from Shawnee lore mention creatures closely resembling Mothman, the Missingwa and Wape respectively. Missingwa, the description is almost exact to Mothman, but also includes another description of something that looks similar to a Bigfoot, which is very interesting to those who study cryptids, obviously. The Wape legend is also similar and part of Shawnee lore. The lore explains that a family of Native Americans chose to become white hawks, living in the forest near Point Pleasant. Some believe the Mothman may be an angel, demon, or the product of a blood curse placed upon the town by Chief Cornstalk, who was murdered along with his son in the area. Similarly, the curse theory is one attached to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. With all the attention on Mothman, the legend began to spread. The stories began reaching wider audiences and were popularized by Gray Barker and John Keel in the Mothman Prophecies. These books claimed there were supernatural events related to the sightings and were the first to point out the connection to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. The book was later adapted into a film in 2002. Even Point Pleasant, where the Mothman legend originated, celebrates his legacy with an annual festival. We may never know if the Mothman exists or what those who witnessed really saw, but we can continue to spread the knowledge and stories and hope to one day find answers. Thank you so much for joining me on the Well Unknown podcast, and I look forward to the next one. Stay curious.